first, let me welcome you, Arif Saab, for taking time out to come and talk to us once again. It's always a pleasure to listen to you and to host you. A lot of members of our forum have been requesting me to request you to come back again for another talk. So I think I have been trying to get you for the past at least 3 or 4 months. I know you have been very busy, but still, I appreciate your joining us today. So for those members who are new to this particular discussion, Arif Saab is not new to us, and he has already spoken to us last year, and that was a very interesting talk, widely welcomed and shared on the internet too. Sheikh Arif Abdul Hussain Sahib is a great scholar of Islam. Presently is the director and senior lecturer and researcher at Al-Mahdi Institute in Birmingham, UK. He's also the co-director of CIMS, that is Center for Intra-Muslim Studies. In fact, he is into uniting the Muslim various sects, especially the Shia, and the Sunnis and other sects. And he promotes intra-Muslim studies to promote this idea of unification of Muslim sects and the Muslim community as such across the sectarian divide. And he's also the author of a very popular book and very interesting book, which I have with me, titled Islam and God-Centricity, examining the articles of faith. And I think I suggest that those who have not read it, I suggest that they must buy this book, and I strongly recommend this book for you. And it's a wonderful book, and it's an eye-opener in a sense. And the subject of today's discussion, that is the changing forms of Islam and Sharia, is actually highly topical. Not that Islam and Sharia are ever out of the news, so they're always in the news, but more so recently after the takeover of Taliban for the second time in Afghanistan. The American forces had to leave, and Taliban took over once again. So in that background, a lot of people have been skeptical about Taliban, although Taliban have been telling us that they're going to be different, they're going to be more inclusive, but we don't see any signs of that. So in this background, Islam and Sharia have again come into sharp focus. So what exactly do we mean by Islam, and what exactly do we mean by Sharia? Are they rigid? Are they cast in stone? Or are they flexible? And is Sharia divine? Islam, of course, is divine, we all know. But what Islam are you talking about? Are you talking about the Islam of the Taliban, or the Ahladis, or the Salafis, or the Deobandis, or the Malikis? Which Islam are you talking about? So these are all very complex terms, although on the face of it, they look simple. For instance, the word Sharia itself occurs just once in the Quran, in Surah Jasiyah, where Allah says that Allah has put the Prophet on the path of Sharia from among his commandments. So basically, it's just a way of life. It's a path. It's a value system of the Quran. That's what it talks about. It doesn't refer to any legal precepts or law as such, or any kind of legislative commandment of God. It just talks about a way of life. And there's another verse in the Quran in Surah Shura, which talks about Allah giving the shara, because it says shara lakum min ad-dini ma wasabihi Nuhan, the shara which we gave to Nuh and the Prophet Muhammad, and also to Prophet Ibrahim, Musa, and then Isa. The same shara Allah says has given to this Muslim community too, which means it's not a law Quran is talking about. It is talking about a way of life, a value system. So, but then some people have made this value system into a rigid form of Islamic Islamic law, and they try to impose it in various parts of the Islamic world, whether it's Afghanistan or Pakistan. They have their own interpretation which they try to impose. Actually, they have made it rigid when the whole thing, when the law, in any law that is derived from these Islamic sources, cannot be divine. It's a human effort, but it has to be in line with the Quranic teachings and the prophetic teachings. Sheikh Arif Saab is a great expert on these things, and he has been talking about it, teaching about it to a lot of students and across the globe. I mean, his videos are very popular across the globe. So we thought that we should invite him once again, especially after the takeover of Taliban, and and, and to discuss whether the whole idea of Islam itself is rigid, and the whole idea of Sharia itself is rigid, or is it flexible, or has it changed over a period of time, or has it changed ever since the Prophet left us, or ever since the Prophet gave us this Quran. So without much delay, now I think I should request Sheikh Arif Saab to take on from here and enlighten us with his discourse. I think he will speak for about 30 or 40 minutes, I mean, depending on his own inclination. And after that, we will have a 45-minute to an hour of conversation and discussion on this. People are open to asking questions, and it will be moderated in the sense that the questions must pertain to the subject, not outside it. Thank you so much, listeners, and thank you, Arif Saab. Over to you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be with you all. Faisal Bhai, thank you so much for having me on your forum once again. I need to commend you for the work that you are doing and the responses that you are providing in terms of enlightened, reasoned explanations about Islam and Sharia. And I've been watching your programs. Allah bless you. I would like to start with this prelude that when the Blessed Prophet Muhammad came to his community, there were warring factions, very backward, irrational, superstitious, not having any confidence within themselves. When the Prophet brought his message, they were not Muslims, so they were not following Islam in whatever form we understand at present. And inshallah, we'll endeavor to clarify this in a while as to what is Islam by the Quranic logic. What appealed to them of what the Prophet was saying was the rationality of what the Prophet was conveying. Intuitively, by intuition, what we mean is knowledge that does not require mediation of rationality. Intuitively, they saw, yes, this makes sense. And then they reasoned with it and they understood that, yes, whatever the Prophet is saying is in line with the way humans ought to be. So he oriented them with a beautiful purpose within themselves and then gave them a beautiful system of rights, do's and don'ts, and a spiritual identity, which they found very productive, value-based, and progressive and yielding for their human condition. Now, the key success of the Prophet was in removal of hatred and malice and bringing them all upon the pedestal of being one in terms of their humanity. If you look at the Charter of Medina, it is not at the exclusion of people of the book, nor at the exclusion of the pagans. He brings them together on common values and interests. It is a great shame that we have forgotten to see this aspect of the Prophet's message, the rationality with which he brought his message. He allowed the people of the book to remain as the people of the book, appreciated them in their own context. He brought his people to a pedestal where they all had their own identities. And he said, beyond this all is your inner orientation towards God that can withstand this plurality and this difference. The key to success is to work together in harmony, unison, and peaceful coexistence. If you look at the Quran, you will not find any verse that ordains fighting beyond its own specific context. And even in those verses, we will find that when the aggressors cease fighting, then you cease fighting. It seems from here that the Quran was always ordaining fighting for the sake of defense of the self, and only to the extent that the fight continues. Otherwise, when it stops, stop it. And the huge success of the Blessed Prophet was in this, that with the minimal loss of life, he brings about a League of Nations and a brotherhood that not only joins his own kind or Muslims, but the people of other faith, and at times people who are alien to the people of the book towards the end of his prophetic missionary sort of a role. Now, let me build on this rational prelude. When we think of God as human beings, how do we understand God? Whether we belong to the Abrahamic faiths or we belong to faiths that are not considered Abrahamic by the strict sense, although I personally believe that there is no faith upon the face of this earth that is not Abrahamic, whether directly or indirectly, one and all are monotheistic in essence. This includes the Hindus and the branches that branch off from the Hindu faith. So if you ask everybody, well, what is God and what is the nature of God? Everybody will respond, God is the most beautiful one, the most caring one, the most loving one. So we ask, what is the communication of God? They will all say his communication is a productive communication that seeks to bring about the virtuous state within humanity. What about the laws of God? Well, the laws of God have to be just because God is just. What does justice mean? Give everything its rightful due. Do you think God can love one people and hate another people? Everybody at that point will be startled and say, no, God as God cannot. God or authors all the colors. He authors all the religions, but he himself cannot have priority, cannot prioritize one over the other, or cannot have favor over one over the other. And how is it possible? He instills parental love within our souls, through which we love all our children. How can he, being the one who imparts a ray of his mercy upon a parent and makes the parent so compassionate, how can he lack compassion in his own divine, beautiful self? And then again, the instructor will not care whether the student is a boy or a girl or black or white. They will appreciate the efforts of the student, and the student will be rewarded in accordance with actualizing their intellectual potential. So God has to be the most supreme, the most beautiful, the most perfect. So I ask again the people of faith, can that one supremely beautiful God say something to one group and say something different to another group? They will say, no, that is logically inconsistent. If there is one God, and if he's the author of all, and if he wants good for one and all, then his communication has to be one as well. It can't be different. We ask, can the system that God gives be unjust? Everybody will say, no, the system can never be unjust. It has to be just because it is from God. So we are seeing rationally, we are addressing ourselves and each other with those beautiful qualities that we ourselves aspire to and we find in the being of God. I ask one more question rationally before we go into our theme. What about the fathers of religion who communicated on behalf of God? Why do we respect them? We will say because they were the embodiment of godliness. They were virtuous people, they were moral people, they were righteous people. I ask again, do you venerate Ram or Krishna because he was a thief, a coward, a murderer, a tyrant? The Hindus will absolutely deny all of these things. No, we only venerate Ram and Krishna because they were good, they were truthful, they were generous, they were kind, they were giving life to people, not taking life away from them. I asked the Buddhist, was the great Buddha an ungodly person? I said, no, he was a virtuous person, and that's why we venerate him. The Jews say the same about their prophet. The Christians say the same about blessed Jesus. The Muslims say the same about blessed Muhammad. The Shia say the same about their Imams, and the Sunni says the same about the glorious noble Sahaba. When we look at it accurately, we find actually at the core of it, the truth is the same, and it is embedded within our souls. We give different faces to the same truth. That is exactly what is going on. So now, having set that rational prelude, where does the problem come from? The problem comes from our assumption as Muslims, and the Hindu assumption as Hindu, and the Christian assumption as Christian, and the Jewish assumption as Jewish. Of what? Of finality of their religion and of the exclusivity of the religion. All of us have this same problem, and we find a huge tension when we talk rationally between what our reason is saying and what is felt at the intuitive level, and between what we are advocating in terms of our religion and what we feel we are bound to follow in terms of our religion. And it's creating a huge struggle within us. What is the problem? The problem is that we intuitively understand what is right. Rationally, we can discern it. But there is a stumbling block. But God has spoken. And God is giving this exclusivity and finality to my religion. How can I go against God? That would mean I am committing a great error. So I'm asking, are you ready to go against your intuition and your reason? The response comes, well, I don't trust my reason here, and I don't trust my intuition here. So I will say that what about the first people in Mecca who embraced Islam? Did they embrace it on the basis of their intuition and rationality, or against their intuition and rationality? The answer is obvious. If their intuition and rationality did not make sense of what the Prophet was saying, they would have never embraced Islam. So I would say the whole thing is turned upon its head. It's become reversed now. Intuition and rationality was a means to come to Islam. Today, pursuance of Islam means to go against intuition and rationality. Does that make sense to anyone? Now, with setting that prelude, let us go into our talk, explaining the real problems that are there. As Muslims, we commit ourselves to Islam, but we see that when we are committing ourselves to Islam, we are doing so at the expense of rationality and intuition. And we can be forgiven for this naivety. Why? We feel that Islam is final and it is exclusive. What does that mean? That its theology is most accurate, its devotional laws are optimal, and its societal regulations that were given in the time of the Prophet, the shares of inheritance, the right of divorce, owning slaves, owning right-hand maids and concubine, are all eternal laws, stoning people to death and decapitation of hands. Why would we think that? Well, it is based on the verses of the Quran. Inna deen indallah al-Islam. The deen with Allah is Islam. And another verse, وَمَنْ يَبْتَغِي غَيْرِ الْإِسْلَامِ دِينًا. And he who seeks other than Islam as a deen, فَلَنْ يُقْبَلَ مِنْهُ. It will never be accepted, and they will be of the losers in the hereafter. This then brings this notion that if we were to commit ourselves to any practice that is outside the fold of Islam and what we understand as Sharia, the law system, then we will not find salvation and it will never be accepted from us. However, if we were to look at the Quran accurately, we will find that these two verses, in the way we have interpreted them, stand in sharp contradiction to a host of other verses, such as what? إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَالَّذِينَ هَادُوا وَالنَّصَارَى وَالصَّابِئِينَ مَنْ آمَنَ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا. Indeed, the people who are faithful, the Jews, the Christians, and the Sabians, whoever believes in Allah in the last day and commits themselves to righteous deeds, they will have their reward with God, and no fear will befall them, and neither shall they grieve. Now, this verse has been repeated twice, once in Surah Baqarah and once Surah Ma'idah. And the verses that we just quoted, inna deen inda Allah al-Islam, wa man yabtaghi ghayr Islam deenan, comes in Surah Al-Imran. Baqarah was revealed before Al-Imran, and Al-Imran was revealed before Ma'idah. So you have to conclude that when these verses were revealed, the Muslims never understood these verses to mean Islam and Sharia in the formalistic sense that we have understood today. Because had they understood it in that way, then Islam has already negated it in a later surah. So how can these verses in the Deen Indallah al-Islam mean the Islam that we have understood? Quran itself is negating it by giving salvation to the Christians, Jews, and the Sabians on the basis of belief in God and on the basis of belief in hereafter. We will see that the huge mistake that is made is in assuming that Islam here meant a full system of law and Sharia. The Sharia was all in the process of being revealed. It wasn't revealed yet. Islam here meant something else. It meant surrender to the will of God as and how it was delivered. Now, the other thing here is, Inna Ladina Amanu. those who bring faith. Why are they not called Innal Ladina Aslamu? Why are they not addressed as indeed the people who are Muslims? Because the designation of Muslim was not given to the prophetic community at that point. It was still a fresh notion. The word Islam and Muslim was never being used as Islam in the uppercase I and Muslim in the uppercase M. But even if it was, then look at how the verses that come before these two verses in Adin in Allah Islam or Islam Dinan and the ones that come after it, look at how they place the community of the Prophet on equal pedestal with the Christians, Jews, and the Sabians. It says, indeed, those who are faithful, O Muhammad, the people who follow you, the Christians, Jews, and Sabians, all of them, if they believe in Allah and the hereafter and do righteous deeds. So what if salvation was given to the Muslims, then why lump the Muslims together with the rest by saying, beyond the title of being faithful in Islam, if there is true inner faith in Allah and the hereafter, and if there is commitment to righteous deeds, then they will have their salvation. So being a Muslim or a Jew or a Christian or Sabian doesn't mean anything to God. Similarly, look at another set of verses of Surah Nisa. It will not be in accordance with your desire, O Muslims, nor the desire of the people of the scriptures, Jews and Christians and the Sabians and Zoroastrians. Whoever works evil will have the recompense thereof, and he will not find any protector or helper besides Allah. Allah is saying to Muslims and non-Muslims, it's not your wishful thinking. You're not going to get paradise. If you do evil, you'll be punished. And whoever does righteous good deeds, male or female, and is a true believer in the oneness of Allah, such will enter paradise, and not the least injustice, even to the size of a speck of a black back of a date stone, will be done to them. Here, he is lumping again together the Muslims, Jews, Christians, Sabians together, and saying, if you do good deeds and you're a believer to Allah, you will get your reward. And then look at the phenomenal way in which the last verse comes in this series. And who can be better in religion than one who submits his face to Allah? And he is a muhsin, a good doer, and follows the religion of Ibrahim, the Hanif. Now here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is relating all these Abrahamic faiths to Ibrahim. He is not relating them to Muhammad Rasulullah or Isa or Musa. The Quran is talking about another meaning of Islam altogether. Now look at this verse. If the law of the people of the book, which we call Sharia, was not valid, then look at this verse and let the people of the gospel judge by what Allah has revealed therein. And whoever does not judge by what Allah has revealed, then it is those who are the defiant, disobedient. And another verse, say, O people of the book, you are upon nothing until you establish the Torah and Injil. So we are seeing that if we were to assume inna deen and Allah al-Islam, and man yabtaghi ghayra al-Islam deenan falan yuqbala min, if we assume that these verses are giving finality to Islam, the Islam which is the religion that we are following, then there is high level of inconsistency between those two verses and what the Quran is saying, especially when we read the Quran in a chronological order of revelation. So first you get Surah Baqarah giving salvation to Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Then you get these two verses. Then you get Surah Ma'idah giving salvation to Jews, Christians, Sabians, and Muslims. So you can see high level of inconsistency. And on the other hand, you can see that God is saying, no, follow your own Sharia. And if you don't follow your own Sharia, then you are oppressive people. How do we resolve this inconsistency? Let us see the verse of Ali Imran 84. Say we believe in Allah and what has been revealed to us and what was revealed to Ibrahim, Ismail, Ishaq, and Yaqub and his descendants, and what was given to Moses, Jesus, and other prophets from their Lord. We make no distinction between any of the prophets, and we are surrendered to Allah, i.e., we are in the state of Islam, we are Muslims to Allah. Now, if this verse, in which we are declaring our belief of the message of all the prophets and all the scriptures, if this were to mean that we profess belief in all their Sharia, then there is high level of inconsistency, because the Sharia of Muhammad Rasulullah is not the Sharia of Isa or Musa. Their devotional practices were different. Our devotional practices are different. So what does that mean? That can only mean we believe in the essence of the message that was brought to Musa, Isa, all of these people, and the practices that we believe in. We can say that they had their practice which are salvific, and we have our practice which are salvific. So let us now go in terms of the forms of the Sharia. We believe in whatever was revealed to Ibrahim, Ismail, Ishaq, Moses, Jesus, and whatever they were given. So we are seeing this can only mean in the sense of God-centricity and virtuous message of God, but not the form. So does that mean that the forms of those messages were invalid? Let us look at another verse that Faizbai quoted. Shara'a lakum min ad-din. He has ordained shara'a for you, O believers, the way, i.e. the deen, which he decreed for Noah, and what we have revealed to you, O Prophet, and what we decreed for Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. Uphold the deen and make no divisions in it. What you call the polytheists to is unbearable for them. So here, what we are seeing is that the Quran is saying to the Prophet Muhammad that we have shara formulated for you the same deen that we have been giving to Ibrahim, Musa, Nuh, Ibrahim, Musa, Isa. It's the same deen that is being given to you all. But we see that the Sharias or the paths or the formulation of that deen is different in every case. So here we understand that deen of necessity must have two components. One is the component that I call the essence or the theory, and the other is the component that I call the form, which is the practice. But when we ask the Quran for further elucidation as to, well, what is the meaning of deen? The Quran gives us this meaning that deen is inner orientation and a way of life. The Quran states that Ibrahim was not a Jew or a Christian, rather he was a Hanif, upright, beautiful, God-centered soul, and a Muslim who was surrendered to God, not a mushrik, not surrendered to idols. Then again, we look at the word deen in Surah Kafirun and Surah Bayyana. قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ. Say, all disbelievers, I do not worship the one you worship. So they're not disbelievers in God. They are disbelievers in the notion of God that the Prophet had. And at the end of that surah, it concludes, Lakum dinukum waliyadin. You have your way of life, I have my way of life, centered around what we believe. Similarly, Surah Bayyana, Lam yakuni alladhina kafaru min ahli al-kitab wal mushrikeen. The people who disbelieve from the people of the book and the polytheists. Here, disbelief does not mean disbelief in God. It means disbelief in the communication that God was sending with the Prophet Muhammad. So when we look at the word deen, we see that the deen is contrasted with the deen of Allah, with the deen of shirk, and the communication of Allah with communication of other than Allah. Now here we find that the modern day Muslims cannot be classified as mushrik, because according to the language of the Quran, mushrik is one who gives authority to a rival God in ordaining a message contrary to the one that God is giving. The modern day Hindu will not say indecency is good, or immorality is good, or an unvirtuous state is good. The modern day Hindu will say, speak the truth, be charitable, give life, honor your oaths, be good to your parents, do not be indecent. If the modern day Hindu says this, then he is saying the same thing that the Abrahamic faiths are saying on behalf of God. However, the mushrikeen of Makkah used to say that this God who is other than Allah, we believe in Allah, but this God who is other than Allah is ordaining this. And at times, they used to attribute these things to Allah himself. Allah commands us to indecency. And Allah rebuttals it in the Quran and said, God does not command to indecency. Are you saying what you do not understand? So deen means God orientation and a way of life that is God-centered and very, very productive. And this in the Quran is contrasted by a deen of the mushrik, which means orientation towards idols and partners of God, and commitment to their communication which stand against virtues, morality, and decency. Now, Quran also uses another word known as millah. Millah are the founding assumptions of a deen. The millah of Ibrahim, Allah says, upon which the deen of Ibrahim is based. The millah of Ibrahim means Ibrahim's orientation towards God and commitment towards God, upon which his deen, his theory or essence and form are based, where the form is known as Sharia and the theory is known as what we call theology. So now, surrender in the Quran to this deen is known as Islam, the word Islam. And this Islam and the word Muslim as the one who surrendered, the Quran uses for Ibrahim and Ismail. O Lord, ij'alna muslimin lak. O Lord, make us two Muslims for you. The word Muslim is used. Again, it is used in the case of Yaqub and the children of Yaqub. La tamutunna illa wa antum muslimun. O children, do not die except as Muslims. The disciples of Jesus also say that we are Muslims. This first component of being surrendered to God in the Quran is attributed historically to every prophet and every righteous person, that all of them are Muslims. That's the first component. The second component of the deen is the method of surrender, or how do you surrender to God? Now, this surrender to the will of God is either in terms of the devotion or societal laws. Now, if we look at different groups who have called themselves Muslims, historically, the Quran says there's always been one deen of Allah that has always been coming through successive prophets. When we look at the Quran carefully, we will see that at one point, a group of people who considered themselves as the followers of the deen of Allah called themselves Jews. At another point, they called themselves Sabians. At another point, they called themselves Zoroastrians. At another point, they called themselves Christians. At another point, they called themselves Muslims, with a capital M and a capital I as Islam. But according to the Quran, all of these people who have followed the same deen with its essence of orientation towards God and the command that God has given in terms of the devotions and in terms of the societal law have always been called Muslims in the state of Islam. But they have chosen to call themselves Zoroastrians, Christians, Jews, Sabians, and Muslims. But God in the Quran, in essence, calls them all Islam, their religions as Islam and Muslims. Now, the form of deen or the Sharia, as opposed to the essence of deen, which is the God orientation from within. The form of deen, which is the Sharia, has got two aspects, devotional aspects and interactional aspect. And we say Sharia is a combination of these two. Now, as far as the devotional aspects are concerned, we will see that they give identity to each group. Christians have their own identity markers, the Jews have their own, the Sabians have their own, the Zoroastrians have their own, the Muslims have their own. Now here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala admits to plurality of these devotional aspects that are supposed to bring us towards God, make us God-oriented. Now if you look at the verse, we will see Allah says, for every one of them, we have made direction that they face. In terms of the Qibla for the Muslims, others have their own directions. Allah says, now chase each other or race each other in good. Do not be distracted by different directions. Allah has given you all different directions. Allah is admitting to this plurality and He does not want to nullify it either. He's saying that plurality is there, it is acceptable, it is your identity, bodily marker. As simple as that. For everyone, we have made ceremonies through which they glorify the name of Allah. In Hajj, You have your ceremony of doing a Hajj and cutting animals and mentioning them of Allah. I have given them all their own ceremonies. These are your identity markers. These are your devotional identity markers. For everyone, we have made a Sharia and a Minhaj. For everyone, we have made a Sharia. The devotional Sharia is there for everyone. They will all follow it. Do not contend with each other in that. Fasts are prescribed upon you as they were prescribed before you. Different forms of fasts were prescribed by Allah for different groups of people. So from here, we understand that the first component of deen, which is God orientation, God centricity, runs equally for one and all. The second component of deen, which is Sharia, has two further portions. One are the devotional. As far as the devotional are concerned, Allah does not care for different devotional practices of different people. He accepts them all. He says, you have your direction, they have their direction. You have your ceremonies, they have their own ceremonies. You have your fast, they have their own fast. Allah accepts all of them, and He expects us to abide by our own, and He expects this natural plurality. But the other area of Sharia are the interactions and societal laws, such as what? The system of rights, the form of marriage, shares of inheritance, punishments and capital punishment, having slaves, owning concubines, our treatment of the other. These are known as interactional laws. They are not devotions in the practice. They are societal laws that belong to human community in the capacity of them being human. Now, what is the principle that God sets in terms of determining the societal laws? If you look at the Quran, it is extremely emphatic on the establishment of justice. So what is just? Just is to give everything its rightful due. But the rightful due of a grown adult and the rightful due of a child are very different. The stipend that you give to a child of 10 cannot be given to a young adult of 18. It will become unjust. So if you're using justice as a yardstick, then we will see that the human existential aptitudes are always changing, they're always evolving. What is just at one time will not be just at another time. So the societal laws should always evolve with the notion of justice. Are you saying, therefore, that the laws of the Quran are not sacred? I will say, yes, they are not sacred. They are sacred in terms of the fact that they were formulated on the principle of justice. So the essence of justice is sacred, not the form that the justice took in the context of the Blessed Prophet. Now look at this before we go further into this particular understanding. That why did successive Sharia come and replace each other? Did the Sharia of Isa that replaced the Sharia of Musa say to us that don't be God-centered, don't be virtuous, don't be truthful, don't be devoted to God? It didn't change any of that aspect of the essence and the theory. What did it change? It only changed societal laws. When the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ came, what did he change of the Sharia of Musa, Isa, and Ibrahim? Of course, by the time of Prophet Muhammad, the human community was far more mature, far more sophisticated, far more noble. So the Quran altogether omits the law of stoning to death. It doesn't have it. The Quran initiates a beautiful trend for the emancipation of slaves that the other Sharias did not have. The Quran gives a huge number of rights to women, the right to divorce, the right to ownership, so on and so forth. So we are seeing that the Sharia component of societal regulation was the only one that was being tweaked and changed in consecutive Sharias that were being revealed in the Sharia, in the phenomena of the successive Sharia. Similarly, when you look at the Quran in its chronological order, how the surahs were revealed, that please let us try and read the Quran in the way of revelation, not the compiled Quran, because we will see that the essence is one thing, and the Quran was formulating the essence differently, and that's why you have abrogation. How can you abrogate a verse which is eternal and final? You can't, can you? If you say that the verse is eternal, then what is the meaning of abrogation? How can you abrogate an eternal verse? And the abrogated verse is still inside the Quran. What does that show? That the essence is eternal, the form has been changed. And why is the form changed? Of course, the form has to change with the growing aptitudes of the community. The law has to mirror the existential state of the community. So we are seeing that what is changing in accordance with the human growing aptitudes, in accordance with human nobility, is not God orientation part of the deen. It's not the devotional aspects that are identity, permanent identity markers of different faith groups. What is changing is actually the societal laws and the systems of rights and responsibilities. In my opinion, and I've discussed this at length, the whole of this issue of Islam and plurality of forms and the ever mutability of the Sharia in my fourth book on Islam and God-Centricity. And once it's available by the end of this month, inshallah, I'll tell Faiz by. What I've discussed here is that the Sharia law in terms of interaction is secular. By secular, it does not mean at the exclusion of God. By secular, it means that reason will sort it out in line with the principles of human justice and human nobility. When the Blessed Prophet came, he did this, the Quran did the same thing in a very pragmatic fashion. It took account of the strengths and the weaknesses of the community, and in accordance with the principle of justice and nobility, formulated the laws, the societal laws. Now, the beautiful thing about the Quran is that the Quran leaves the values at times of those laws embedded within the verses, so that we understand that the value is the reason through which the Quran has formulated that law in that way. Look at the verse of the two female witnesses. The verse says, if you can't find two men, then one male and two female witnesses. Least, if one were to forget, the other one will remind her. The question comes here is that it is all about the accuracy of testimonies. If one were not to forget, there is no reason to have another one. Can you see that? Least if one forgets. So the Quran was mindful that women were left uneducated and they were unaccustomed to retaining knowledge. So therefore, I mean, without any sort of disrespect, back in the day, the women were like, their minds were not accustomed to retaining information. They were like childlike. So if one forgets, the other one can remind her. But the central point is accurate testimony. So if a woman's mind becomes so evolved that she can retain information, then there is no need for another one. But on the other hand, if men start becoming senile through whatever reason, then the whole equation will be reversed. One woman and two men. The central value there is accuracy of testimony, nothing else. But that's the best way it was formulated, given the strengths and the weaknesses of the prophetic community. Look at the verse, Ar-Rijal Qawwamuna 'ala Nisa, that men have predominance upon women. We have taken it to mean that men are superior. But look at the verse, Bima faddala ba'duhum 'ala ba'd, through the grace that Allah has given to some over others. And so the men are supposed to maintain women. Now, back in the day, the societal setup was such that men would go to war and obviously receive the spoils of war. They would till the land, they would do the hard labor. So they would maintain the women. Let us talk about a futuristic society 1,000 years from now, where human beings do not need to do any work. They are such supreme brains. They have drones. They have artificially intelligent robots. Now, at that point, if a woman is better at earning through using her mind in commerce, due to the methods of commerce changing, and it is all done with the mind, doesn't she have the greater fadl of Allah than a man? What if a woman can fly a drone in warfare, fly a drone sitting at a screen and destroy many drones of the enemies? Doesn't she have a greater fadl of Allah than a man? The whole thing is turned. So there is no value of the physical form that were given to these essential values back in the day. Societal law is always based on aptitudes. So at sometimes the Quran leaves the values embedded within the verses. At other times, the Quran initiates trends that are in line with human growth. So, for example, the Quran initiated the trend of freeing the slave in accordance with giving back the dignity to the other. At every instance, the Quran is freeing slaves. This was never meant to come to an end. This was just the initiation of the trend, so that at some point the human mind could finally abolish slavery and abolish concubinage, owning of sex slaves. It was never meant to be final. At times, the Quran bases its law on the societal values, and they were known to the people, like what you call it. Or let me give another example: giving the rights of women to women. Prior to Islam, women did not have any right in the Arabian society. He gave them right to ownership. He gave them right to divorce, the khula divorce. He gave them spiritual equal status with men. The Prophet never intended, and the Quran never intended, to block the rights of women at that point. They were just initiating a positive trend that was in line with the growing aptitudes. So as the aptitudes increase, the rights increase. Sometimes the laws are based on the societal context. So, for example, السارق والسارقة فاقطعوا أيديهما. The male and the female thief cut their hands off. Here we know it was for the protection of the society. Today, we are very, very dignified people. We don't go and decapitate people's hands. If it is the case of protection of society and the case of reformation of individual, then we have other means to protect society and reform individuals. If you cut people's hands and feet off, they're becoming a burden on society. It does not create a healthy society. You slap and warn and intimidate a child, but when they become old enough, you have to reason with them. That's what the Quran is showing. There was no finality to those forms. Similarly, if you look at the laws of inheritance, we will see that it was in a particular societal setup where men were providers for women. In this part of the world, in Europe and America, women are not provided for. They are equal contributors to the household. And they are carers in addition. Back in the day, the women were provided for. They did not have any expenses. So whatever inheritance they received was their saving or their investment. Whereas men had to earn and provide and upkeep, so they had double the share of inheritance. The Quranic verse says, when it's talking about the shares of fathers and children, you do not know which one of the two is most beneficial for you. So both of them are in the first rank of inheritance. And of course, the father, by and large, is the older one, so he gets less inheritance because he's going to die soon, and the son is still beginning the life, so he's going to get a more share, right? Get a greater share. But what about this part of the world in which a woman contributes as much as a man to the household expenses and is also a carer? How is it just to give her half the share? So we will see that these forms of the Quran that we call Sharia do not have any sacredness about them, do not have any finality to them, and do not have any absoluteness to them. They are always supposed to be in a state of flux. Thus, the societal interactional laws of the Quran are not eternal. They will always change with the growing aptitudes and sense of justice. As the human community becomes global, we will have to admit to global standards and evolving human rights. It is possible to say that from the time of Prophet Ibrahim, I'm asking a question. Is it possible to say that from the time of Prophet Ibrahim to the time of Prophet Muhammad, the human community evolved so much, but after the Prophet Muhammad, the human community has stopped evolving in its nobility and existential capacity? It is not possible to say that. The Quran is fixed in a particular time frame. The human community has evolved since then. The only reason we are getting stuck is because of the notion of finality of the Sharia societal law and system of rights. And it is because of this, Islam is being accused of being backwards. How can we have slaves or concubines or give half shares of inheritance to women who are equal contributors and are no longer maintained by their husbands in many regions or not given equal rights of divorce in the present day? Surely all of these laws are unjust at present due to growing human nobility and existential aptitudes. As such, these laws are inconsistent with the very principle of justice, which is adamantly advocated by the Quran. They were just in their own context due to the growth level of humanity, but they are unjust at present. Now, take this example as I come to the conclusion. 10 years ago, giving women less pay than men for the same task was just. But 10 years on, it is seen as unjust due to the growth of human nobility. So now we have this issue. Why should women get paid less? In conclusion, I say we conclude like this. Deen is a way of life and God orientation. It is either surrender to one God, termed as Islam, or surrender to other than one virtuous God. Deen has furthermore two practical components. One is the devotional aspect, and the other one is the societal laws, which we term as Sharia. The devotional practices are identity markers for different monotheistic faith and are supposed to be permanent. However, interactional societal law is based on notion of justice that is always in flux and mutable with growth of humanity. What remains eternal in this case are the values of justice through changing form. So I'll repeat once again. Deen has essence, which is God orientation, and it has form. Form are of two types. One is the identity marker, which are the devotional forms, which stay the same, and we have natural plurality of different faiths. And the other one are the societal laws, which are supposed to embrace humanity as a global reality or a national reality, and they are supposed to be based on the principles of justice and nobility, and will always fluctuate and are mutable. I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sheikh Arif Sahib. That was absolutely fascinating. And I entirely agree with you on the whole idea of the Sharia being flexible and a state of flux, because, as you rightly pointed out, the essence is fixed. You can't change the value system, but any law that you make or formulate has to be on the basis of that essence. So, therefore, humans are allowed to make any law, but that law should be consistent with the essence laid down in the teachings of all prophets, not just the Prophet Muhammad. That's why the Quran says, it gave you the same deen which was given to Nuh alayhi salam, or Musa alayhi salam, Ibrahim or Isa alayhi salam. So therefore, this is absolutely clear that, but we have made it so rigid. I especially agreed with you. In fact, I wrote an article a few months ago on the idea of the evidence, the feminine evidence. I mean, there's a notion among Muslims that, two women equal one man. So that's not the case. And the word used in the verse that you quoted was, if one of them forgets, the other would remind her. It can also be interpreted differently. The word used there in Arabic is antazilla. So zilla means if somebody makes a mistake, if she misunderstands the particular idea of it, the transaction, because in those days women were not allowed to be educated, not that they were not smart, they were not allowed to be educated, they were kept out of education and other walks of life. So therefore, but the Quran wanted to bring them into society, integrate them into the society. So the Quran says, in case, given this situation, you have two, just in case somebody forgets. But the most important question, as you rightly pointed out, Sheikh Arif Saab, is, if if that second woman who's on a standby does not forget, or does not err, or does not I think somebody has to mute. Who's I think somebody is talking. Yes. Then even the 7th century law says the witness will be one man and one woman. So there is no gender bias here at all. It's actually a convenience given to the woman. But unfortunately, our theologians and our clergymen misinterpreted that law deliberately, in my opinion, because they all of them were patriarchal. So they wanted to impose the patriarchal notion of keeping the women under the thumb. So I think we need to fight this out intellectually, and we need to bring back, reclaim the original essence of Islam from the Quran and the authentic teachings of the Prophet. Therefore, I think it's been a fascinating talk that you just gave. I'm sure the participants who are here will have a lot of questions to ask you, maybe clarifications to seek also. So therefore, I would request people to raise their hands and ask the questions. But I can see